I'm Ben Little, I'm the series editor. I started the project, I suppose technically about 3 years ago now. The first book, Radical Future, came out of sort of two separate ideas, and one was I worked with Soundings Journal, and the editor of that, Jonathan Rutherford, had put together a book called Young Britain in the year 2000, and he sort of asked me to try and think about if I would like to do a book sort of following up from that a decade later. And I sort of thought about that and thought about who might contribute, and I came back to Jonathan with the idea that actually one of the things I really struggle with, because I teach a module on current affairs, I'm a lecturer in a university. One of the things I really struggle with is the lack of engagement in politics with my students, sort of the idea that current affairs is something which really isn't for them, and is only something that squares are into. So I sort of combined this idea of looking at young Britain with the idea of trying to find some way to engage my students, and really the way to do that, the only way to do that, is to sort of show them how it's relevant to their lives. So that was like these two things sort of came together in this book, which was then seen as sort of an intervention in the general election, and that's how we framed it, to sort of say, well, let's put the interests of young people forward. And it did really, really well. We were actually quite surprised at how well it did. It got sort of 60,000 downloads to this point, which, there's no budget, there was no promotion, it was just, it took off in a really good way. So when I'd been talking to Claire about doing a second book, and then Guy approached me and said he thought it was time already for another book on young people, not 10 years away, but then given what's happened in the intervening period, sort of all over the world, like there's been these sort of youth-led, not always revolutions, but there have certainly been lots of revolutions, just all sort of this regeneration just sort of came together as a really, I think it's a really special book, and actually having the contributors, having been able to get those contributors together and to have the sort of range of ideas, but also to have the sort of coherence that the book actually has is really fascinating. So I think when Guy, for instance, talks about this is a new post-Thatcher consensus, I think there's something authentic about that, which is really, really great.
And what's the overall thrust of the book? What's it covering, really? I
mean, I think it's basically saying that the dominant ideology that we've had for the last 30 years is starting. The cracks are more than showing. It feels like it's crumbling in terms of actually having any sort of moral weight anymore. I mean, it's just not delivering anything really for people of our generation, sort of the post-79ers, that sort of bracket, and certainly not for those who are yet to be born. This idea of future generations as well. So it sort of starts from a position that we need to come up with something different, and we need to be thinking, very carefully and very seriously about what that difference might look like, what the values would be embedded in such a system, and I think that's some of the stuff that the book starts to tackle. I mean, it doesn't have all the answers. It's just it's a start, but yeah, it's getting there. It's starting that conversation, starting that debate, and I think it's really important that it doesn't become an oppositional, like young people versus old people or whatever. It's about bigger issues, and it's about sort of, fundamentally it's about the ability of society to reproduce itself, and I think that's what's breaking down right now.
Do you think intergenerational fairness is becoming more of an issue? People are becoming more aware of it?
I mean, when we started the first book, it just wasn't on the radar at all. And all of a sudden, that book came out at the same time as a whole range of other books, including Shiv Malik's Jilted Generation, Neil Borman's Polemic, It's All Their Fault, and then even David Willett's had a go with The Pinch. So, yeah, it happened very, very suddenly about 2 years ago, and I think it's very, very central. But the issue is the idea can be used for different means, and it can be used to justify, a continuation of the current set of economic and political practices, or it can be used to argue for a different set. So, I mean, yes, it's very much on the radar, but it's a contested term. It's people invest in it different things, I think.
For politicians, it's a bit too long term, isn't it?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like the sort of, it doesn't fit the electoral cycle. We've got a government now who are building their whole policy on being able to have a big giveaway before the next election, and that sort of politics just isn't right, and it doesn't work. And we need to be really investing in important things like green energy, like energy efficiency, like, well, in education, functioning welfare state, you can, the list just goes on, and actually that idea, that very sort of basic idea that intergenerational fairness becomes simply about, leaving your bank balance as close to the black as possible, I don't think really captures. I mean, if you're handing over society without a deficit, that's great, but what sort of society will you have left? And that's really, I think that's where a lot of the contributors to the book are coming from. It's that purely economic mindset. Like, we need to move away from it. We need to be thinking about well-being. We need to be thinking about all sorts of other stuff.
What do you know about the work of the Intergenerational Foundation?
It's great. We only found out about it through Shiv. Shiv and I had a conversation about doing this book, and it was great that he came on board and then brought IF alongside it as well. I mean, I think putting together and bringing together researchers and sort of a range of different ideas on the topic is really wonderful, and I'm just waiting to see where it goes next, really.
And if you were to name just a few, what do you think are the big intergenerational issues, particularly where you work, and probably the students have some at the top of their minds?
Well, the environment's the big intractable one. I think housing obviously is massive. It's something which I'm very much on the sharp end of the stick of. Education, again, where I work, it's the I find it really difficult that a generation of people who got free higher education just loading more and more debt onto students, when actually education doesn't just offer individuals benefit. The more educated our society is, everyone benefits. So for me those would be the big three, but I'm sure there's plenty more that other contributors here will talk about, health, pensions, there's lots.
Great. Well, Med, thanks very much for talking to us.